A gas station is a convenience store that happens to sell gasoline at a loss. You just bought one. You own the lot, the canopy, the pumps, the little store, and the part nobody thinks about, the 6 steel tanks buried in the dirt underneath all of it, and everyone who drives past believes what you probably believe right now, that you are in the gasoline business. Roughly true. The sign out front is a gasoline sign. The tanker that pulls in twice a week is a gasoline tanker. Except the gasoline is the single least profitable thing on the property. It is bait. You lose the argument on gas and win it 20 feet later, at the coffee machine. By the end of this, you'll know exactly how that works, why the pump barely pays you, why the oil company keeps almost all of it, and why the most dangerous thing you now own is the part you can't see. So what actually stands between you and your first gallon? Not much of what you'd guess. No exam, no vault, no federal charter. There's a contract to fly a major brand, a Shell, a BP, an Exxon on your canopy. You sign a long-term fuel supply agreement with a distributor called a jobber, the middleman who buys from the refiner and delivers to you. That contract locks you into that brand's fuel at that brand's delivered price for years, with image standards, canopy, uniforms, point of sale, all specified, all yours to pay for. But it also protects you. A federal law called the Petroleum Marketing Practices Act, the PMPA, means your supplier can't just wake up one morning and terminate your franchise to hand your corner to someone else. Keep it in mind, it matters enormously later when the brand above you collapses and the law becomes the only thing standing between you and the exit. But the contract isn't the real gate. The real gate is in the ground. You cannot legally sell a single drop until those 6 underground tanks are registered, monitored for leaks, and, under the rule tightened in 2015, wrapped in secondary containment, a second wall around the tank and piping so a leak has somewhere to go besides the water table. And you have to prove you can pay for the damage if it leaks anyway. Federal law makes you carry financial responsibility of $1 million per occurrence before the tanks are allowed to stay in the ground at all. So the barrier to entry isn't a license to sell coffee. It's a contract you can't break and 6 steel tanks you're legally on the hook for. That's the price of the front door. Now, you are not going to pour a foundation and dig tank pits from raw dirt. Nobody with your money does. You buy a station that already exists, and here's the surprise. You're not really buying a building. A gas station barely has one. You're buying 3 things at once. The throughput, meaning how many gallons a month roll through those pumps. The store's cash flow, priced as a multiple of its earnings. And the dirt, priced like commercial real estate on a cap rate. The brand on the canopy is worth money by itself. A branded station typically sells for 10 to 20% more than the identical unbranded one next door. And you don't just inherit the fuel contract, you have to be allowed to assume it, and the supplier charges an assignment fee, commonly $10,000 to $50,000, just to let you step into the deal the last owner signed. So the money's not the obstacle here. It never is for you. The obstacle is judgment. Because some of these stations are startlingly cheap, and a cheap gas station is one of the most dangerous bargains in American real estate. The cheap ones are cheap for a reason, and the reason is almost always sitting in the ground, quietly, waiting. Hold that thought. We'll dig it up in a few minutes, literally. First, the part of this business nobody films: how the gasoline actually gets into your tanks, and why the delivery itself is a bet you can lose. Twice a week, sometimes more, a tanker truck pulls onto your lot, carrying roughly 8,500 to 9,000 gallons of fuel. The scary version of this beat is the obvious one: a truck full of gasoline, a spill, a fire. And it's real, which is exactly why it almost never happens. The driver, the truck, the offloading, the vapor recovery, all of it regulated to the point of boredom. Routine is the whole design. The real risk isn't the fire, it's the invoice. Because here's what makes a gas station different from almost every store you've ever run. You pay for the entire load on or near delivery before you've sold a single gallon of it. As a branded dealer, you buy at the dealer tank wagon price, DTW, which just means the major delivers the fuel and the price already includes the freight. The distributor's cut is built into that number, often around a penny a gallon, a penny. The whole business runs on pennies like it. Now do the arithmetic on one drop. 9,000 gallons at a wholesale cost around $2.85 a gallon is roughly $25,000 of fuel paid up front, sitting in your tanks, before a single customer has pulled in, and the street price can move against you the whole time it sits there. If the wholesale market drops 2 days after your delivery, the station across the street, who filled up today, can undercut you, and you either match them and eat the loss or hold your price and watch your pumps go quiet. That's the trap of the logistics. You don't set the price of gasoline, you just absorb its timing, a small trader forced to hold inventory you already paid for on a commodity whose price is set thousands of miles away. Which raises the obvious uncomfortable question: if you're holding $25,000 loads of a product whose price you don't control, how does any of this actually make money? Let's follow 1 gallon. It's the most important thing in this entire video, so watch where the money goes. In March 2026, the average gallon of regular sold for about $3.64. You are the last person to touch that gallon before the customer. It feels like it should be yours. It's almost entirely not. Of that pump price, about 57% went to the crude oil itself. More than half the money you collected already belonged to whoever pulled that oil out of the ground. Another 21% went to refining, turning crude into gasoline. That's the refiners, not yours. About 14% went to taxes, 18.4 cents to the federal government, and on average another 33 cents or so to your state before the customer even reaches for their wallet, which leaves about 8% for everything else, distribution and the retailer. That last sliver, the thinnest slice on the whole gallon, is the only part of that 364 that was ever pointed at you. So the oil company makes most of the money. Not as an accusation, as arithmetic. You are a rounding error on a barrel of crude, standing under a very expensive canopy. But it's worse than the slice suggests, because that 8% is a gross number, and gross is not what you keep. Watch it get whittled down. The industry average fuel margin, the gross the retailer makes on a gallon, has run around 35 cents in recent years. That's the number the whole fantasy is built on, and it's already almost gone, because the customer paid with a card, and the card network takes a percentage of the whole transaction, not your margin, the whole 364. On the average gallon, that interchange fee runs about 8 cents straight off the top. Now subtract the rest of running a station on that same gallon: the labor at the register, the lights and the coolers, the depreciation on the pumps, the fuel sitting in the ground. When the dust settles, the retailer's net profit on a gallon of gasoline is somewhere around 10 to 15 cents. Call it 13 cents. Keep that number, 13 cents a gallon, because we're going to detonate it twice before this is over. It's about 1% of the pump price. You're running a business whose headline product clears roughly a penny on the dollar. A grocery store would consider that a catastrophe. For you on gasoline, that's a good day. And here's the part that breaks people's brains. When the sign out front jumps to $4.50, you are not making more. You're often making less, because your margin is a roughly fixed number of cents, but the card fee is a percentage. When the price per gallon climbs, the interchange climbs with it, eating into a margin that didn't grow. The expensive gallon is the worst gallon for you. So the station that looks like it's printing money when gas hits $4.50, on the fuel itself, it's closer to a charity with a canopy, which raises the only question that matters: if it isn't the gas, then what on earth are you actually selling? The answer is the 20 feet between the door and the fountain machine. Start with the split, because it's the whole thesis of the business in 2 numbers. Across the US convenience store industry, fuel is about 2/3 of all the sales, but only about 38% of the gross profit. 2/3 of the money that comes in, under 40% of the money you keep. The pumps are loud, busy, and financially almost beside the point. The inside of the store, the merchandise and the food, is roughly 1/3 of the sales, but the majority of the profit. That is the actual business you bought. The gasoline was the doorbell. Look at what a gallon nets you next to what a cup nets you. 13 cents on a gallon of gasoline. The fountain drink that customer grabs on the way to the register cost you maybe 40 cents and sells for $2.50. That's your 13 cents, detonated the first time. 1 soda is worth about 16 gallons of gasoline to you. 16. The person who buys $40 of gas and nothing else is barely a customer. The person who buys nothing but a coffee and a breakfast sandwich is the one keeping your lights on. So the number that actually governs your station isn't the price of crude. It's how many people at the pump walk inside, and the industry average is that about 57% of them do. Every point you can move that number is worth more than any price war you could ever win at the pump, and inside, the categories are not equal. Tobacco moves enormous dollars at thin margins. It's traffic, not profit. Lottery is a commission. You're a clerk taking a cut, but packaged drinks, snacks, candy carry margins several times fatter than fuel, and the fastest growing, highest margin category of all is prepared food service. The roller grill, The coffee, the made-to-order sandwich, is now the single biggest source of in-store gross margin dollars in the industry. The whole industry has figured this out. In 2025, US convenience stores sold more than $340 billion of stuff inside the store, not counting a drop of fuel, the 23rd consecutive year of growth. The gas is flat, the store is a rocket. If you want to see where this ends, look at the company that took the idea to its absurd, glorious extreme, Butch-E's. It builds cathedral-sized stores with 100 fuel pumps and a wall of brisket and treats the gasoline as a doormat. A typical American convenience store does around $5.5 million a year. A single Butch-E's is estimated to do somewhere in the range of 55 to 90 million. Estimated it's a private company, so those are careful outside guesses. But the magnitude is the point. 10 to 20 times a normal store built by a company that understood the pump was never the business, so you've found the money. It was inside the whole time. That would be a lovely place to end, except we still have to go back to the thing you're standing on, the tanks. Everything you own on this lot depreciates on a schedule you can predict. There is one exception, and it runs the other way: the contamination underneath compounds. Steel tanks in wet soil corrode. When one finally weeps and given enough decades, one eventually does. Gasoline doesn't pool politely. It sinks, it spreads, and it finds groundwater. And at that moment, the dirt itself becomes a product you are selling. To environmental lawyers, here's what the cleanup costs. A small caught-early, soil-only leak might run about $10,000. The average federally tracked cleanup is around $154,000. But that's an average, and averages hide the thing that kills you. Let a plume reach groundwater, and the cost runs from $100,000 to well over $1 million for one station. Keep that $154,000 average next to a truth from the top of this video. That station was cheap for a reason. This is the reason. A station whose cleanup bill exceeds the value of the land is not an asset. It is a liability with a price tag, and the price tag is negative. You would have to be paid to take it. That's the trap the whole video's been circling. The one thing that can turn your asset into a debt is the one thing you can't see, can't move, and legally can't walk away from. And there's a small, elegant cruelty in how this system is funded. Remember the 18.4 cents of federal tax on every gallon. 1/10 of a penny of it doesn't go to highways. It goes into something called the Lust Trust Fund, leaking underground storage tanks. Every gallon you sell pays a fraction of a cent into a national fund that exists to clean up leaking tanks exactly like yours. You have been quietly prepaying for your own environmental disaster, 1 gallon at a time, since the day you opened. And this isn't hypothetical. It has a name, a date, and about 1,000 stranded owners exactly like you. On December 5, 2011, Getty Petroleum Marketing, the operator that supplied and leased more than 1,000 Getty-branded stations across the Northeast, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And here the two threads of this entire video braid into one real disaster. Thread 1, the franchise collapse. The brand above all those dealers simply failed, and the master lease that held the network together was terminated for non-payment. Thread 2, the tanks. Scattered under that portfolio were leaking underground storage tanks, and the bankruptcy became a very public, very expensive fight over a single question: when the operator goes bankrupt, who is legally responsible for cleaning up the contamination? And note the two Gettys, because they're easy to confuse. Getty Realty, the landlord that owned the dirt, survived. Getty Petroleum Marketing, the operator that ran the fuel, is the one that died. The timing has that dry, familiar smell too. The Russian oil giant Lukoil had owned Getty Petroleum Marketing and sold it off to a small buyer in February 2011, about 9 months before the Chapter 11 filing. When the dust settled, Lukoil was left as a creditor, claiming it was owed around $42 million, money owed to Lukoil. Note, not the cleanup bill, which was its own separate, sprawling mess. Funny coincidence though, selling the whole thing off 9 months before it hit the wall. For the individual dealer, the lesson is brutal and clean. You can run a spotless store, convert your pump customers, sell your food service, and still be sunk by a leak you didn't cause and a brand collapsing 3 levels above your head. This is the asset that can become a debt the law won't let you set down. So how do you own one of these without it owning you? A few rules fall straight out of everything we just watched. First, know the age of your tanks before you know anything else. The purchase price is trivia next to the remediation exposure sitting underneath it. Get the environmental assessment before you get excited. Second, wherever you can, own the dirt. Don't just lease it. When the Getty Dealers brand collapsed, the ones who owned their real estate had an asset to sell. The ones who only leased had a contract that evaporated. Third, live on the store, not the pump. Treat gasoline as what it is, the most expensive customer acquisition tool in retail, and make your money on the coffee, the food, and the cooler. Fourth, watch the card fee like it's a competitor, because it is a percentage that rises with every price spike, coming for the same 13 cents everything else is. Follow those and you have a durable little business, except there's one more force on the horizon aimed directly at the pump. The car itself is changing. In the fall of 2025, electric vehicles hit a record, 1 in 10 new cars sold in the United States, in a rush of buyers scrambling to beat an expiring federal tax credit. Then it fell back the moment the credit died. The full year landed closer to 8%. Where it goes next is genuinely contested. Bloomberg NEF, one of the most watched forecasters, projects roughly 17% of US sales by 2030, and the headline there is that they cut that forecast sharply from a projection near half of all sales they'd made just 2 years earlier. Nobody knows the slope. Everybody knows the direction, and the direction is a problem for a business that clears 13 cents a gallon. The consulting firm BCG projects that up to a quarter of all fuel stations could be unprofitable by 2035, with fuel profit falling as much as 60% in the most EV-heavy markets. There's your 13 cents, detonated the second time. Cut a thin margin by 60% and it stops being thin, it goes negative. That one number, the penny on the dollar the whole pump runs on, is exactly what the electric car is aimed at. It was never going to survive a hit like that. The store might, the 13 cents won't, and this isn't a distant memo. Shell has been offloading something like 1,000 of its retail stations over 2024 and 2025, selling and shutting them down, openly pivoting money toward EV charging instead. The majors are already voting with their real estate, so the pump is under real threat. And this is exactly where most people draw the wrong conclusion. They assume the electric car kills the gas station. It doesn't, it kills the pump. Those are not the same thing, because the gasoline was never the business. It was 38% of the profit and falling. The business was the store, and the store may not just survive the electric car, it may feast on it. Think about the dwell time. A gasoline fill-up takes 4 minutes, and more than 40% of your customers never come inside. A fast charge takes 15 to 30. That's 15 to 30 minutes of a captive customer standing next to your coffee, your food, and your cooler, with nothing to do but spend. The pump's whole problem was that it was too fast to sell anything. The charger is slow. Slow for a store is money. So step back and look at what you actually bought, honestly, with both hands on the ledger. You bought a business where the headline product barely pays, where you carry $25,000 loads of a commodity whose price you don't set, where the oil company keeps most of every gallon and the card network takes a bite of the rest. And you bought a business that quietly prints money the moment the driver opens the door, where one soda outperforms 16 gallons, where the food counter grows every single year, and where inside store sales have climbed for 23 straight years while the pumps stood still. The gas was never the thing you bought. It just held the door. The convenience store keeps the lights on. The underground tanks keep the lawyers on retainer. And the charger going up on the corner is either the future of the whole business or the most expensive hedge in American retail, and you won't know which for a decade. It's a business that survives on 13 cents and a fountain drink and dies on a leak nobody saw coming. Both of those are true on the same lot, on the same day, under the same canopy. So is a gas station a store, a gamble, or a very slow environmental disaster with good coffee? It's all three, and which one it turns out to be depends almost entirely on the 6 tanks you can't see and the 57% of drivers you can. You have the money, you've seen the ground it's standing on, you decide.